This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Three, two, one. Welcome to another Britflix.com podcast. My name is Stuart Wright, and today's guest is screenwriter Line Langebek. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. It's great to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, look, we are going to talk about the film that you wrote, The Girl with the Needle, and then we'll do 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. Does that sound like what you've signed up for?
It sounds exactly like it, yeah. Excellent.
Well, look, let me just do a little bit of an introduction just to give people like my reaction to The Girl with the Needle. Liverpool filmmaker David Moult was on my podcast a few years back, and he introduced me to the concept of emotionally violent films that have such a brutal honesty about life and humanity that they give you almost like the same visceral reaction that I'd associate with physical violence on screen. And I would say that The Girl with the Needle fits quite snugly into his idea of how a film can impact a viewer. I don't know what your thoughts are. And then I'm like, just generally speaking, I was sort of mindful of James Baldwin's quote, which is, anyone who's ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor, which I think is like at the beating heart of some of what you're doing with the screenplay for that film. And then there was the other thing that I thought it was a real phrase, but I couldn't find who it's sourced from. But it goes along the lines of, the thing about being poor is that it's not a mindset, it's a reality. And I think that, you know, if anybody listened to this then gets a chance to watch The Girl with the Needle, your film dumps the viewer into the harshest realities and hardships associated with being poor in 1918 Denmark. Certainly makes you live it. Amazing film. Congratulations, I would say.
Thank you so much. Emotionally violent. I've not heard that before, but I think I'm going to steal that actually to describe the film going forward.
He was using it to describe Locke because you know, in the way that Tom Hardy's character, he doesn't have to do what he's doing. He could have kept it a secret from his wife.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I've had people say that they don't think they can see The Girl with the Needle because they think it's too violent, but they mean like physical, visceral violence on screen. And I have to say, it's not that kind of horror.
No,
but it is obviously emotionally violent, and for some people, you know, it's too much. But there's nothing that you see on screen. No, it's just that you are plunged into the kind of reality in a way, even though the film is a sort of dark fairy tale of sorts. Well.
No, it is, and I think that's why I say I think that's because I think what David was trying to get me to understand when we were having that conversation was that, you know, not all horror has to be about someone chasing you to kill you. It can just be the horror of existing, which is what The Girl with the Needle does brilliantly. Now, at the end of the film, you then tell us it was inspired by true events in the sort of fade out. So let's start then. What in particular was or were the kernels of the idea in sort of true events that led to the film that became The Girl with the Needle?
Well, the kernel was a chapter in a book that my dad had given me, which was different chapters of different famous crime cases in Denmark. And Dagmar, who is one of the main characters in The Girl with the Needle, you know, not to spoil anything if you haven't seen it, but I mean, you can look that case up, I guess. So, was a chapter in the book.
Okay.
And there was a picture of her, which was her mugshot. And then there was a chapter about the crime that she committed and that she was convicted for and sentenced to a life sentence in prison for. And it just sort of drew me in. I was quite fascinated by it because it's a very dark, so the darkest of crimes. And that was kind of both horrifying, but also intriguing as to how could you kind of go there? What could make a person commit such a crime? That was an intriguing question that there didn't seem to be an easy answer to. And then the time period as well.
Mm.
And once you start, initially it seemed like this is another serial killer story. And then once you start researching the time period, it becomes clear that actually it's about much more than that. And therefore immediately much more interesting, not to do a story that condones what she did, but that tries to understand the kind of context of it.
Yeah.
That was the starting point.
So in that sense then, going off that true crime sort of chapter that you read, what kind of research then does a film like this entail? Because like I said earlier, you really do throw us into what feels like the harsh realities of the time. So, what were any key texts or sources that you drew upon to build a picture of this world?
Yeah, I mean, once this process started, because I was sort of, working on the idea for a couple of years before the process for this film started. It was research like there were court transcripts of her court case, or there were several kind of court cases, and there was 122 pages in the National Archives of Denmark that I found.
Wow.
It was visiting a museum just outside of Copenhagen that is dedicated just to World War One, that taught me things about World War One that I didn't know.
Okay.
And that, we didn't know. It was going to a museum in Chelsea that has this sort of history of plastic surgery, which began during World War One. So, and then looking into women's rights, Copenhagen at the time, which was incredibly poor, and nothing like the Copenhagen that you would see today if you visit for the weekend or wherever you're going. So all of that began to just kind of draw up a different picture. Well, I think the biggest surprise was, I knew that women there were no reproductive rights at the time. I knew that Copenhagen was porous. So some of those things were not a surprise. I think the things I found out about World War One was a surprise because Denmark was neutral, supposedly during World War One, and that was sort of what I'd been taught. And I hadn't really properly understood what neutral meant, because being neutral during a war is not just that then you're sitting it out and it doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
It's not how it works. You still have to have an army ready in case you get pulled in. So there was still rationing. There was also the Danish border with Germany has moved up and down. It hasn't moved for a good 100 years now, but it had moved up and down, and therefore there's a region in Denmark where people are pretty bilingual. They speak both German and Danish, and there were people in that region who would have been drafted for Germany, and so that became a way to talk about the war as well.
Okay.
The soldier husband in the story has been drafted for Germany, and they have come from that region. That's sort of how we've crafted the story. So there was lots that suddenly began to create a very different picture of the times that this woman operated in. And then the fact, there was a city museum that had stuff about her, ads in papers that women had put in papers looking for somebody who would take their child. It wasn't that she went around on the prowl looking for babies. It was actually sort of more the other way around, that these women who got into unfortunate circumstances were looking for people to help them either get an abortion or take their baby, basically. So there was quite a lot of research, even if we were not making, it's not a traditional biopic. It's not historically accurate in every way, but for sure we wanted to kind of paint this picture, and that the horror of we were thinking about it as a horror film.
No, that makes sense.
But sort of true horror.
And then once you started to sort of piece together those elements of what's real and then what you deem is dramatic in terms of the story, what do you remember being the sort of key storytelling challenges to pulling the script together?
Well, I guess the key challenge is that you have one main character who is sort of committing the worst of crimes.
Yeah.
She's killing she's killing babies. So we knew that we couldn't really come in via her.
Yes.
And that you had to come in via somebody else. And Carolina, who's, for the most part, the main character, was also a real character, except she changes in our story. But in real life, there was a young woman who handed over her baby and regretted it and came back to get the baby back, and she wouldn't let her in, and she went to the police and so on. So they met much later, and in our story they obviously meet much earlier. But it felt like we had to come in via somebody else to really understand the sort of circumstances that would lead young women in particular, but also others, to hand over their babies to this woman. So the key challenges was to have, both characters are at times unsympathetic. But also it's a sort of doppelganger story in a way. It is, a young woman who gets pulled into this world, and there's a bit of but for the grace of God go I in the way that the story then unfolds.
Yeah, because I think I'd argue that sort of Dagmar deserves less sympathy than Carolina does.
Yes, once you realise who she is.
Yeah.
But she's also, she's the only person who helps her.
In
a way. So, of course she is, an unsympathetic character in a way, but she's also human. I think that was the kind of the biggest, not challenge in a way, that once you start to look into this time period, I think it becomes easier to understand what it is that's going on, and therefore to find the humanity in both of the character, or in all of them actually, because there's lots of people in the story that there's the mother of the factory owner, there's the factory owner, the son, and there's lots of people doing things at various points that aren't necessarily there's no real hero in this story.
No. Well, yeah. It's certainly an anti-hero, if not
lots of anti-heroes.
Yeah, indeed. But well, I think that almost like sleight of hand by making Carolina seem the focal point for what the story you're about to tell is really clever, because you're kind of, by the time Dagmar comes along, you're invested in Carolina as and I can't believe how much you juggled with her life. It was like, I went in cold without thinking about what it could be about. So I'm just watching it as it's happening, and I'm thinking, oh, she's landed on her feet. No, she's not. Yes, she has. Oh, she's getting married. And you're like, it was really, you're really sort of pulling at the strings, and then it just slips down, and you're like, you ain't coming back up from that. But the husband character, who was like a yo-yo relationship, it becomes in the end, isn't it? In the way that he's the only person that really wants her, and she doesn't seem to know whether that's going to be good for her or not.
Yeah, and he's a complicated character as well, because he's quite damaged. And obviously he has come back, not just physically damaged from the war, but also, today we would say he has post-traumatic stress disorder, and they didn't know what that was at the time. But of course he's suffers from all kinds of stuff that he's seen during the war, apart from his sort of physical damage. So, but then that's also what the film plays with, in a way, who looks like a monster but isn't, and who is maybe a version of a monster but doesn't necessarily present as such. So that's sort of part of and I guess the opening sequence is, gives a hint of that, in a way.
Indeed.
Of the film.
So when you've written this then, so if that's the story challenges pulling it together, then what story elements emerged in the edit then that weren't apparent when you're writing it? Like, how did anything sort of materially change in terms of how you were able to tell the story once everyone could see what had been shot?
Well, I'm not sitting in on the edit, obviously, as the writer, even though I did, see a cut. But I think, so the opening sequence was not in the script.
Okay.
And so that was something they did after, and I think, so I think that was something that emerged as a kind of as a clever way of kind of putting the audience into the kind of frame of mind of what film we're entering, and also kind of without spelling it out, foreshadowing things that are going to happen in a way. The overlaying of like faces and playing with who looks like what, etc. But apart from that, I think that there were things that were cut a little bit, like there were scenes that kind of disappeared in the edit, just as you sort of trim and there's a kind of, you're trying to keep a certain kind of pace and so on. So there wasn't a lot, but there were certain things that were cut down a little bit. And it's not a film that moves in a sort of traditional, and when I say traditional, I mean kind of Western 3-act structure kind of way. Yeah, it's more episodic in that sense. So it is like you said, you sort of like, then this thing happens and you think, oh, okay, and then you move on to the next chapter, and then something else kind of. So there's lots of turning points in a way, but it's not like, oh, here's the first act and here's the second act and here's the
it allows it allows that lovely cinema trick of moving forward in time quite quickly without having to establish it really directly. You feel those jumps as natural.
Yeah, and we obviously have this as, there's a pregnancy that happens, and therefore in a way gives it a time frame.
Yes, exactly.
That the birth has to happen, and then the kind of the next part of the story. Can
I ask you then just a more general question about your own approach to writing? So are you, in terms of when you're wrestling with a screenplay, what methods do you adopt to sort of pull those ideas together? Are you like, index carding it, talking it through with peers, burning the midnight oil, staring at the wall? What's your approach for unpacking stories for you as a writer?
It depends a little bit on what the project is.
Okay.
But, I'm quite a big fan of using index cards. And, and I know often work, as I did in this case, work with a director. And sometimes you do it in person. Sometimes you're not in the same city or country even, and maybe you do it online. So there's a lot of talking it through, but index cards at least at some part of during some of the process I will use. Yeah. And sometimes I've done it online as well. I've been using something called Miro, which you can use for lots of other things. But in its most basic, you can create a kind of virtual index card notice board and move kind of little post-its around and kind of and see the sort of shape of the story in that way. So that's one way that I
Okay.
You always do the traditional outlines and treatments. You have to kind of do that as part of the funded development process. But
indeed.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you for sharing that insight into The Girl with a Needle. For UK listeners, it's available on Mubi. And we will now move seamlessly into 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. Are you ready for this?
Yes. Ready as I'll ever be.
If you want to say at this point, how easy was it to distill to 3 films? Did you wrestle with a few titles?
I wrestled. I would wrestle with the Letterboxd 4 as well. And well, as you know, because I struggled sending you my 3, I think I had it down to 20, and then from there it was a real struggle. I think I have a year of my life that I would call the year that shaped me. But, that was sort of where I got introduced to lots of films from all over the world, and everything kind of springs from there in a way. So
brilliant. Well, look, we will do each film 5 minutes at a time, and every time we hear this sound, that means that 5 minutes are up. You can hear that at your end, I guess, from the giggle.
I can, yes.
Indeed. So without further ado, let us start with the first one. 1950s, Betty Davis and Anne Baxter star All About Eve is the story of a seemingly timid but secretly ruthless engineer who insinuates herself into the lives of an aging Broadway star and her circle of theatre friends. Fun fact, Betty Davis fell in love with her co-star Gary Merrill during the shoot of this, and the two were married in July 1950, a few weeks after the film was completed. They adopted a baby girl and called her Margot after her character in the movie.
I did not know this.
So tell us, why does this film have impact on you, and what memories does it hold?
So All About Eve, and I can't remember when I first saw it, but there was a sort of period where I discovered, lots of old black and white films, and it was films like The Apartment by Billy Wilder, which I love, and then there were loads of others, but All About Eve as well, which I think sort of sits in the same bracket as The Apartment for me. That films that are funny, they are comedies, and they're sort of classed as comedies, but actually underneath them they're also quite dark. There's something, really dark stories underneath them, characters who are not necessarily always sympathetic, and in a way, All About Eve is very far from Girl with a Needle, but there's a kind of duality of those two kind of female characters as well.
Okay,
that I think is interesting, and I think a film like The Substance for me has a huge kind of connection to,
yes, it does. Never thought of that.
Eve, it's that story, and I think it's just it's incredibly well written. So from a writing point of view, and Margot is this fantastic character. There's this hilarious opening sequence where she talks about when Eve first appeared in her life, or it's the film critic who introduces her, how she's kind of become the star that she is. She's emerged on stage, age 5 or whatever it is, naked, stark naked, and then that she sort of became a star from there. And then they're there to, celebrate Eve, and then you get told the story of how Eve took over Margot's life in a way, or her place. Sort of center stage, and it's just filled with lots of fun situations and kind of brilliant characters who are all unsympathetic in different ways. And then you have Margot and a sort of fantastic Bette Davis, who doesn't entirely see the truth until it's too late. So I think it was a film that for me was a sort of a kind of lesson in how to create female characters that had edge to them. And without the sort of, it's become a little bit of a thing that female characters had to be sort of strong female characters, and Margot is not necessarily strong in that sense. She's kind of often wrong and willful, and there's a sort of fantastic scene midway through where Marilyn Monroe is in as well. She sort of comes down and she's reckless and she's like, fasten your seatbelts. It's become like a famous line from the film. It's going to be a bumpy ride, and she's just there to get drunk and be outrageous. That was.
Yes, I suppose it's that idea, isn't it? That agency isn't associated with being right all the time, is it? It's just as much fun watching somebody mess up as it is watching them succeed.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of lesson in that you could have characters that you don't have to agree with and you don't have to like them all the time, but you're there for the ride, and you want to kind of, because we're all, they're human basically. It's a lesson in that. And Margot is incredibly human. She's jealous, and she once she realizes what Eve is up to, she will trip her up as much as Eve is also trying to undermine her. And it's a story about ambition as well, of course, and sort of and I guess fame in a way as well. But it is sort of two women kind of fighting each other in a very elegant way.
It's always fascinating, isn't it, when sort of the entertainment industry tells a story about what's wrong with the entertainment industry in the way that people are. They never. It's never optimistic when they turn the camera back on themselves.
No, and that's fun too.
Right, and that's our first 5 minutes. Well done.
On to the next one.
On to the next one. Second choice is WimWenders' 1987 fantasy drama, Wings of Desire, where an angel tires of his purely ethereal life of merely overseeing humans in Berlin and longs for a tangible joys of physical existence when he falls in love with a mortal. Fun fact, in the mid to late 80s, filming the actual Berlin Wall was prohibited, so a replica was built twice close to the original. The first fake wall warped in the rain because the contractor had built it out of wood.
Oh.
So tell me,
You're coming out with all the facts. Yeah.
So, well, hopefully it doesn't line up with what you're about to say. So, Lena, what was the impact of this movie on you, and why does it have such fond memories for you?
So I think WimWenders and many of his films had a kind of huge impact on me. There's also Paris, Texas, which I really like, but Wings of Desire, I think, was the first not the first, but one of the first times I encountered something that felt quite poetic as cinema. And
Okay.
Before I became a screenwriter, I was a poet, although I don't think I would have called myself a poet at the time, but I wrote poetry and sort of short stories and so on. And then I found screenwriting and cinema. And Wings of Desire is a kind of poetic essay about a city. It's set before the wall came down in a Berlin that's still sort of east and west. And then it has sort of very beautiful kind of, voiceovers as well by Peter Handke, and who's kind of the screenwriter on the film. And it was a different, it's black and white. Now I've chosen 2 black and white films. So, or The Girl with the Needle is black and white, a little bit by accident. But I think it was just a lesson in, I remember buying the screenplay. I found this version that was both in English and in German, so I could read the original kind of German as well. And it was just a sort of lesson in how poetic cinema could be as well. And then at the same time, yes, it's a story about an angel who wants to be human, which seems like, rather than have eternal life, he actually would like to, he falls in love, of course. It's about love, and he wants to kind of come down to earth, and he wants to feel what it's like to be human. And along the way, he meets Peter Falk, who's I love Columbo, and he's sort of there as this guy who has also done that journey. And he's like, I know you're there. They're standing by like a hamburger van or something like that. And he's like, I can't see you, but I know you're there. And he sort of tells him that it's worth it, And I think, there was a remake of it some years later called City of Angels with Meg Ryan and Nicolas Cage, and it just it got it all wrong in terms of what the Wings of Desire is about. Because what's beautiful about Wings of Desire is that it says love is messy, it hurts, but that's kind of part of it. And then, and you get to the dishes and, that's awful, but you have to get to the dishes. And City of Angels doesn't, without spoiling anything for people who haven't seen it. But that's the thing, that's the key thing about the film in a way. So it wasn't for kind of the structure of the film or anything like that, and there's lots of other films that I watched as well, of course. I've sort of grown up with, you watch like, Spielberg and, lots of, E.T. I loved, there's lots of other films, obviously Kubrick cinema, but this was sort of finding something else that was like, oh yeah, cinema can also be this, and writing can also be that. It can kind of be the small moments that can kind of compose a film as well. Of course there's a story, which is beautifully crafted, but it's also those kind of smaller moments
but I suppose
that make up the story. I
suppose as well, it's that idea of it doesn't make any bones about it being about what it means to be human. I mean, it's right up front that's what it's trying to say. So the angel as a proxy for someone that looks but isn't human is a beautiful thing, because like it's hard for us to examine it because life is life, isn't it? That's what humans do, and we know it'll end. Whereas
Yeah,
not knowing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes that sort of, humans talk about, eternal life.
Finish your
And
thought.
here you have two angels who want, like, well, one of them wants, he doesn't want eternal life. He wants to live.
No, I must admit. I mean, in terms of the moment, I'm sure the moment when we go, we'll want eternal life. But I think the idea of eternal life will be a nightmare. I've seen enough vampire movies to know being around for hundreds of years is no fun. It's no fun.
No, and when you meet people who are very old, actually, often what they say is like, unless everybody gets eternal life, it's no fun being around. Because you've lost so many people. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's better to make the best out of what we've. I've got
a 98-year-old neighbour who I mean, it was hilarious the way he said it. I'm going out with my friend. He's 90, and it was like. It's like nearly 2 centuries of life just knocking about with each other. It's quite.
I know. We get to that stage. I think 90, 98. Well, we're kind of in the same age bracket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right then. For your final choice, a new film on me. Jumping forward a decade to your final choice for Takeshi Kitano's 1997 crime drama Hana-Bi. Simple story of Nishi leaves the police in the face of harrowing personal and professional difficulties, spiraling into depression. He makes questionable decisions. Fun fact about this one is linked to the title. The title literally translates into fireworks, but if you look further into the basis of the Japanese characters that make up what we translate as fireworks, it's composed of 2 smaller words, fire and flower. So linguistically speaking, the story and style of Hana-Bi is the synthesis of 2 opposing images, the agent of destruction and the symbol of birth and renewal, which I thought was quite nice.
Yeah, so Hana-Bi was like, for me, this is particularly where I struggled in terms of my third choice.
Okay.
There's also films like, because I'll tell you why I chose this one, but, there's films by Wong Kar-wai, In the Mood for Love and so on, that I also, I think, saw around this time. And Yi Yi, a 1 and a 2 by Edward Yang. That was a sort of, also kind of poetic cinema. But I think this one was, a lot of Kitano's films are quite violent, and they always have a character himself who's, and he's this sort of comedic, quite violent character in many of his films.
Yeah.
But in Hana-Bi, I discovered this, like, the sort of contrast between beauty and violence, which was really interesting in terms of, you have a story of a guy, it's a cop who discovers that his wife has cancer, and sort of terminal cancer, and he's trying to care for her. And he's an incredibly violent kind of person, per usual in the kind of Kitano kind of oeuvre, but he's contrasted with, as you see him with his wife, he takes her on this trip. And he's sort of, and he has a partner who's been injured and is in a wheelchair, and he's kind of angry about so many things, hence the sort of fireworks. But now and again he explodes. But actually, the sort of moments that I remember most from the film are these sort of smaller moments, and also with how little you could kind of write both violence, how little you need to see in order for something to feel violent.
Yeah.
And the same thing with love, in a way that there's very little sort of erotic love in that sense in the film, but there is a moment, I think it's on the beach, and he sits with his wife looking out on the sea, and they sort of lean their heads against each other, sort of, and it's incredibly not erotic but sensual, in a way that you're like, oh, you sort of get the love between these two people, and it expressed in a really small way. So it sort of just sprung to my mind when you were asking for the 3 films, even though I was like, oh yes, but there's also, Barry Lyndon and The Shining, and Jane Campion's cinema, and sort of that I was kind of going,
Where do you come across Hana-Bi? Because obviously it's not a massively popular film. I mean,
no. So this is the year that is, rather than the 3 films, the year that kind of shaped me is that I went to a place called the European Film College.
Okay.
And it was, when I graduated from high school or kind of equivalent of A-levels, I went to France, to Paris, to live for a while, live out my kind of dreams of being an artist in Paris, which I was. But then, and I was traveling around a bit, and then I went to this place called the European Film College, which was sort of 8-9 months. It was in Denmark. It was people from all over the world. Everything was in English, and you sort of spent 8-9 months making films, but also being taught. We had film history once a week with this British film history teacher called Mark Defanu, and it just introduced me to cinema I'd never seen before. I grew up in a small town. There was one cinema, not a particularly varied program. You could go to like the nearby town, a bigger town had slightly more variety, but both in Paris that had amazing cinemas and stuff. And then at this place, I was just introduced to cinema from all over the world, and all the students that arrived from everywhere. Some of them were older. Oh,
finish your thought. Go on.
Yeah. Some of them were older, and everybody came with like, love of different directors and films, and kind of that they would, put on screenings of. And so it was partly, the film history teacher, but then also the students, and some of them kind of knew Kitano, and so I met lots of different types of cinema at that place, and I think sort of properly fell in love with cinema. That year.
I like the idea of meeting cinema.
Yes.
That's such a lovely image. But I think I think you tap into something that's one of the reasons I do the podcast in this format is that film, no matter where you're from, a film is a 90-minute, 2-hour point of view, so you can, if you can find a film that's not from your point of view, you can be exploring all kinds of worlds.
I know. I think that was the thing I really discovered there, and that I have kind of, in a way, gone by ever since, is that you can sort of travel around the world. I mean, and also discover different ways of, in the UK and in the US, we're often kind of taught a very specific way of crafting stories. But if you watch films from Africa, then cinema is, storytelling is different, and the same from from China, or Japan, and obviously Kurosawa's Rashomon has become a kind of, everybody knows what that is now, and it's been copied lots since. But all of those different ways of telling a story is just endlessly fascinating, and also becomes a way of, I think, and you can love like mainstream American cinema. I absolutely do as well, but all of those, when you watch, I remember somebody saying, oh yeah, you watch like Tarkovsky. Spielberg has seen Tarkovsky, but he doesn't make films like Tarkovsky, but he might have taken a kind of, a way of shooting a certain thing, or the color scheme, or, certain kind of. So you watch it for all of those things, and even if it's just that one moment in Hana-Bi where you go, oh, this could be a way of showing the love rather than the big traditional love scene. It can just be like, a head leaning against a shoulder.
Well, you've reminded me of a fact that I didn't put in. I had a choice between the two that I'd give you, because Hana-Bi was posthumously added to Kurosawa's 100 Favorite Films.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. So, I mean, you choosing it and then reading that, I was thinking, well, I definitely need to see this now.
Yes, you do.
I feel like I'm missing out. Well, look, that brings us to the end of 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. And thank you for sharing that little window into your personal film biography, and also sharing an insight into some of the aspects of how The Girl with the Needle was written. And then, is there anything that you can talk about that's coming up? Anything you want to mention before we go?
I'm working on a couple of different new feature film projects. So they're all feature film projects. So I don't know if I can be very specific. I mean, I am working on one project with a director called Sophia Lowy, which is we're adapting a short story by J.G. Ballard.
Okay.
And
Oh, wow.
Working with Paradise City and BBC Films. And then there's 2-3 other projects.
Excellent. Well,
that I'm working on.
Exciting. Well, look, it just gives me to say then, thank you very much for joining us on the Britflix podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Stuart.
Do remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, follow on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more movies that impacted your life. And if you want to, I'd love to know what your favourite movies are, what your fondest movie memories are. So please share your favourite movies that impacted your life on Twitter. Look for @LeightonRocks. And you can always leave me a review, 5-star preferably. And in your review, tell us which 3 films impacted your life. Best ones get read out on the podcast.
Hey there, Hugh from Poderation here. If you like today's show, why not check out Malt and Magic, a D&D podcast where things are almost literally homebrewed. Malt and Magic is a show that focuses on the immersive and collaborative natures of TTRPGs, working with a cast of amazing characters to create an epic hub where fantasy, mystery, sci-fi, horror, and cyberpunk all collide in one gripping, funny adventure. If you'd like to hear more, check out our website at poderation.com.